So now we are going to start with the JavaScript part of the project. So inside of the script.js file, first we need to create the three variables which will be used to fetch the IDs of the element. But inside our index.html we didn't specify the ID selector, we specify here class selector. So we are going to use the query selector to fetch these elements so that we can bind these UI elements inside our JavaScript. And also you can see this h3 element doesn't have a class, so we are going to use the selector to select these element inside the script.js file. So let me first type the first line of the code. So first is actually our add expense button, and this will be going to initialize the value as document.query selector. So inside of the query selector we need to specify the class name. So the class name is, our button class name is add expense btn. So we're going to use it with the use of dot because it's a class selector. And also I'm going to zoom out a little bit so that you can see the code in the proper line. Now you can see it's giving us the error. The reason for that, we need to specify this inside the double quotes or either in the single quotes. So once we do that, we are successfully able to fetch the button inside the JavaScript. And similarly, we need to create two more lines of the code. So I'm going to simply copy this and paste it two more times. Then this will be our expense list. Okay, and inside of this expense list, I'm going to fetch the class name of the expense list. So I'm going to copy it and again I'm going to paste it here. And then the third one we need is our total expense to display the expense amount. So it's going to be total expenses, and inside of that I'm going to use the class name total expense. I'm going to copy this class name, coming back to the script.js file, and I'm going to paste it here. And also I'm going to press a space here because we are going to select the h3 element. So this is our h3 element. We need to display the amount inside of this h3. So that is the reason I have specified here h3 as well. So that is for the fetching of the elements inside the JavaScript. Now after doing this, we need to create two variables. So the first is actually like an array, which is an empty array, which is actually going to hold all of these inside the array, because every list item will be act as an array element. So we are going to traverse the array and then display it in the form of UI. And then we need a total to display the total amount, which is the total expense. Okay, so we need to create these two variables. So again I'm going to open our own project, means going to click on the tab where our project is expense tracker, and this is the final product that we want to build. So the first thing is I'm going to here use the let keyword. So expenses and is equal to, or I'm going to specify here s for the plural because it is for the expenses. And then I'm going to use the square brackets, which is for the array. Okay, and then I need to create another variable which is for the total, and is going to equal to like 0 because right now the total is 0. Then we need to create some functions. So I'm going to first create all the functions, like just the name of the function. Then we are going to code inside the function. So the first thing is render expenses. So this is the first function that we need. Okay, and then we need another function which is for the add expense. So this will be used to add the expense in the list. So this will be the function name and the body. And the another function is we need is to delete the expenses. So it's going to like function. Then we need to specify the name of the function. I'm going to specify its body. So these are the three functions that will be used. Now this particular one is actually used to create this UI. And inside of the UI, this function add expense will be used to put the data. The data main is actually added by this function, and then this will be used to give the functionality to delete the data. So this function will be called. So first we are going to start the coding inside this render expense function, because also for creating these UI elements, we also need to provide the CSS code as well. So I'm going to just simply make a room here by entering some spaces, and then inside of this function, we need to create the element which is called let, or I can say that the variable of the element which is let HTML is equal to empty. We need to create a div, and inside of that div, which will be acts as a container, means that main div, and then inside of that we need to create the 3 more elements. This is actually a div which is used for the description of the item, then the amount item, and then the button. So we are going to create 4 HTML elements by using the JavaScript code. Okay, so all of this will be done inside the for each method, which is used for the looping purpose. Okay, so first we are going to use the expenses. So expenses dot, which is our array. So we are going to loop it by using the for each. So inside of this for loop, we are going to provide the first as an expense. Okay, expense, and then we need to here provide the arrow syntax by using the fat arrow, and then we are going to open its curly brackets, and after that we need to terminate it. So this is what we are going to do with the expense. I'm also going to provide air spaces so that it looks more clear and meaningful. And then inside of that we are going to initialize this HTML element, which is our variable right now. So this is going to like HTML, and it's going to have a short syntax property. I'm going to use it, which is actually used to initialize and also adding the new elements. Okay, then I'm going to use here a template string. So please pay more attention to this particular code, otherwise things will become more difficult if you didn't watch it properly. So I'm going to take it into multiple lines, and then I will be here specifying a terminator at the end of this, because it's a multi-line string. With the use of template string we can do that, and inside of that I will be using here a div tag. So I'm going to type the whole code, which is div, and it's going to have a class selector is equal to the class selector that I'm going to give here like expense, and it's going to like item. So this will be the class name for the main root element, which is like a root element, which means that the main parent element of these 3 items, these 3 elements, sorry, not items. Then I'm going to close the div tag by entering the division, and instead of that we need another div. So I'm going to copy this because we need a div, and this will be closed here like div, and inside of that I'm going to change its class name to expense item, and hyphen is going to like description, and then this is going to hold a value, but right now all of the values actually, the value that it will display is coming from this add expense method, but we didn't specify any code inside the add expense method. So right now I am going to leave it as empty because we also going to specify the CSS code. Then I'm going to copy this into one more time for this amount one. So I'm going to coming back to the next line, and expense item, this is going to be our amount. So this is our amount, and again this is going to get the value from this add expense function, but we are going to first create the UI, or you can do that just simply add the add expense, but I'm going to follow the easiest approach so that you can easily understand what's actually going on inside this expense tracker application. Then we need a button. So again this button is for this one, which is used to remove the expense item from the list. So again I'm going to type it a button, then it's going to have a class selector. So the class selector is going to like delete expense button, which is like our btn, and it's going to hold a value because we are going to provide this cross icon. So for that we are going to use here a property, means a short property, which is called times, where it's a cross, and then we are going to terminate it, and then we need to close the button tag as well. Right now if we run this application, if I control save it, then you will see nothing is changed. These tags doesn't reflect back inside the expense tracker project. The reason for that, we need to update the inner HTML of this class list, which is this class list, expense list. So we are going to do that. Where is our JavaScript? This is the JavaScript code. So after the end of these for each method, okay, so inside of that first we need to use the expense list dot, and we are going to update its inner HTML is equal to HTML, and then we need to provide a semicolon. The semicolon is totally optional, but from here you need to provide the semicolon and also inside of that, because this is actually a multi-line statement. Okay, and if I save it, then you will see again nothing is happening. The reason for that, because we didn't specify the code inside the add expense. But if we add it here, then when we click on the add expense, the alert, or I can say that the prompt, because alert is the wrong one, the prompt is the correct. So what this line of code does is actually going to update the HTML part, but right now it doesn't going to update it, because when you click on the button, there is no listener is attached and there is no prompt is appearing. So that is the reason it's actually not going to do anything. And after that, we need to add the another line of code, which is total expense, which is actually used to update the value. So here I'm going to use the total expenses dot inner HTML, and it is going to use the, so again I'm going to use here a template string. Template string is going to like total expense, total expenses semicolon, and then I'm going to press here a dollar. Now after the end of the dollar, we need to get the values of the total variable, which is this variable. This is actually a global variable. It will be used inside of this function and also inside of this add expense function to update its value. Okay, so that marks the completion of the code for this render expense function. Now our next step is to add the add expenses. So now we have added the UI code. The only thing, when we add the add expense functionality, we are going to see the this expense list inside the application. Okay, so coming back to our add expense function. So the first thing is we need to create the variable. So it's going to be like of const, and this is going for the description. So description is equal to, and description is going to, first we need to use a prompt. So it is actually a string. So I'm directly using the prompt, and here I'm going to type the enter expense description. Okay, and then this will be prompted to enter the description, and after that we need to add here another const amount. This will be used to enter the amount. The amount can be in a decimal value, means the point value. So that is why I have used here a float to actually accept the decimal values as well, means the point values, float values. And after that we need to check for the condition whether the two elements are entered properly. If one of the element is not entered, then we don't allow the user to enter the list, means enter the expense list. So I'm going to type it here if, then I'm going to start its brackets and also its braces. So inside of the if condition, first I'm going to type it like in description, if it is description and amount. So if it is, then we are going to create here a variable inside the if block, which is our const expense is equal to, and this is going to have an description. So I'm going to create the object which is like description, and then I'm going to initialize it with the description value. Okay, so this is actually the property, and the value it will be held from this variable description. Then I'm going to specify a comma because it is an object, and then again I'm going to specify the amount as a property, and then I'm going to specify the value of this that is coming from the amount. Remember, at the last one doesn't provide the comma, and then we need to terminate this object by providing the terminator. So after that, once we get the value, then we need to use the push function. Remember, we have these expenses, so inside of the array we can use the push function to push the data inside the array. So that is the reason after the end of the object, you should need to remember inside the if block, here we need to type the expenses dot push method. So push, and what we want to push, we want to push an object. So this will be a key value pair object, and then inside the total variable, which is our this total variable, we are going to update the value of this total variable also. So this is like our total, and then I'm going to add here like a short syntaxing, for initializing and also addition. Then I'm going to update its value like amount. So like whatever the total amount is, the amount is actually added by the user will be the total amount of the expense. Okay, so suppose if user enter the amount like $5, then that will be acts as a total expense amount. And then again if the user added, then that will be added. Then 5 means I want to say that like if the user first time enter the amount $5, then that $5 will be initialized to the total variable, then that will be displayed here as a $5. And after that, in the second time when the user enter the second expense, then suppose on that time user enter the 10, then 10 will be added to this total variable. So that is why here I have added the amount, because it's going to update the total variable value every time when the user enters a new expense. Okay, and then after that, inside the if condition, then we need to call the render expense function. So we already created the code inside the render expense function. So once we call the render expense function, and then we can use it. So if I control save it, and if I click on the add expense, then you can see again nothing is happening. The reason for that, we need to add the listener to this button. Okay, so for that I'm going to add outside of the function. So here I will be writing the code like add expense btn. Remember, we have created the variable at the top, which is add expense btn, which is actually fetching the class selector of the add expense button. So we already bind the UI element with the JavaScript with these 3 lines of code. Now we are going to set the listener to this button. So when we click on it, then we get the prompt. Okay. So for that, btn dot add event listener. So we are going to add the event listener. So the event listener that we want to add is the click event. So we need to specify here click, and then we need to specify the comma, and then we need to call the function, which is add expense function as a callback. So once I save it, then if I click on this button, then you can see now the prompt is appearing. So if I enter the prompt like our cola, and if I enter here OK, then you can see the next prompt is not appeared. So there is a problem. So actually I have here actually added a parse float, but there is a one problem. I need to put this parse float inside the brackets. So here I didn't use the prompt. So that is the reason it doesn't actually work with the code, because the amount is not added and the condition of the if is not executed. So here I also need to specify the prompt. So again I need to add here one more brackets, and inside of the bracket I need to call here another time prompt. So once I do that, and if I refresh it by pressing the Ctrl S, if I click on the button, and then again I'm here enter the cola and press OK, then we need to add the price, which is like $50, or you can add it randomly whatever you want. So if I click OK, then you can see the UI is not updated, which is expected because right now inside of this HTML, which we are actually generating with the JavaScript code dynamically, we need to add the variable values, that is total expense or description, that we are getting from this object, which is our expense object, because this object is created inside the expense, and we have used this object here inside of this for each, because what for each will traverse, and that is what we actually want to create. So with the use of this expense object, then we need to specify the value, because we are actually having a template string. Okay, this is a template string, and instead of that we are generating the HTML code dynamically. So we need to provide the here curly brackets, and then we need to specify here a $sign, and inside of this $sign I need to call the expense. This is the expense, and then I need to call the expense dot, and then we will call here a description. We are directly referring to this property, which is description. So if I click on it, then you can see this is our description. And similarly, if I zoom out a little bit more so that you can see the code more clearly, and similarly again we need to provide the amount as well. So again I am here going to type the dollar and then curly brackets, and inside of this curly bracket I need to provide the expense, not SVG, it's like expense, and then dot, and then we need to use the amount. And also for displaying the dollar in the amount, like in front of you can see the dollar, so for that dollar we need to again provide here a dollar. Okay, so this will be used to display the $sign in front of the amount. then the button will remain same. It's going to have a cross. And also there is a one problem. You can see here inside the total expense, I have used here a inner HTML, but this total expenses is actually an H3 element. So we need to update its actually a text property. We don't need to update its inner HTML. So here I have used a wrong property. We need to update the inner text. Again, it's coming the inner HTML. That is because it is the most used one. That is why it's coming at the front inside the suggestion. So I'm going to here use the inner text. Okay, so if I control save it, and still there is a one problem. The problem is that we are actually calling the push function inside the object. What actually we doing? You can see there is a problem here. We are actually using the push function inside the object. So if I try to run this and control save it, if I click on to the prompt, and again if I specify the properties like cola, if I hit OK and then $50 price, then you can see nothing is working. And the reason for that, if I actually open the inspect element by pressing the F12 key, so you can see now we are actually here getting the console. So inside the console you can see there is a one error is shown, type error, expense.push is not a function, and at HTML button.add expense. So script.js 44. So inside the 44 line there is a one problem. You can see here expense.push is not a function. So that is a problem because here we are getting the problem. So we are actually need to push the data inside the expenses. There is only a one character which is S, and actually I have pushed the data inside the object. So that is the reason if I press here S, means we need to change this value to S, which is expenses. Now if I save it and if I click on this add expense button, then you can see the prompt is appearing. So here I will be writing the cola, and if I click OK, and then if I enter the price, so you can see now the value is appearing. So let me close this console window by clicking on this close button. You can see we are getting our like expense tracker, and you can see the cola, and then we have this 50 value. Also this buttons, if I click on it, then nothing will happen because right now we didn't specify the code inside the delete expense. Also this total expense variable actually having only a $sign. The reason for that, because we need to here specify the variable value. So again I need to here use the dollar symbol, and then we need to call here a total. So if I save it and again click on the add expense, again I'm going to enter here milk, and then here if I enter $50 and press enter, then you can see the total expense is appearing $50, and then we have this milk and this 50, and also this cross button. Right now if I click on this cross button, nothing is happening. Again if I click on it, and we have like powder, and if I click here OK, and if I enter like $90, hit OK, then you can see we are getting our next list element. So we are successfully able to render the expenses in the form of list, and also we are able to add the expenses inside the list. Okay, so we have used these two functions, and we have set the listener to the button. So now it's time to specify the CSS code to these three elements. Okay, so we need to open our style.css file, and here inside of that we need to add the CSS code. So the first code is we need to actually style the expense list. So our expense list class is like this. This is the name of our expense list. So we need first to style this, and here I will be pasting the expense list. And inside of this expense list, I'm going to use the margin bottom property. So margin bottom is going to like 20 pixel. Okay, and then we need to style the expense item, which is the main thing. Okay, so the expense item, we have specified the class name inside this code. So I'm going to copy this here, expense item, coming back to the CSS part and Control V to paste the code. And inside of the expense item, I'm going to first use the display property, which is like display flex. And if I use here justify content, and justify content is going to like space between. So if I control save it, then you can see the item is now appearing in a form of single row. And then we need to use the align item property. Align item is going to be like center. If I control save it, then it's going to center the things. Then we need to specify the background color. So the background color I will be using here F9 and F9. And you can see we getting this white color. Then I need to specify the padding. So the padding is going to like 10 pixel. and after that I will be specifying the border radius. So border radius is going to be like 5 pixel. Control save it. Then you can see this is the item, and then we need to specify the margin bottom. So every time each item will be displayed differently. So if I use margin bottom 10 pixel, then you can see now we are able to get the list in a much better way. You can see we have these buttons, so we need to specify the code for the buttons as well. So before that, styling the button, I'm going to use the expense, like where is our JavaScript, expense item description. We need to provide the style code for this one as also. And coming back to here, and I'm going to increase its font weight. So it's like font weight property, and it's going to like bold. Okay, and similarly I'm going to copy this again one more time. So this one is for the amount. Okay, and this is also bold. You can see these two now appearing in a bold, more bolder. Okay, and then we need to specify the code for the button. So again, coming back to the script.js file, this is our delete button class. So I'm going to copy this class, coming back to the style.css, press the dot key and then Control V to paste the code. And instead of that, I'm going to use the first background color. So the background color is actually, we are going to use here hashtag F44, which is for the red, means red color, not red, it's a red color. And then we need to specify the color as white. So it's like hashtag FFF. Also need to specify the hash, not hashtag, it's a hash character. And then need to specify the border to none. Control save it, and you can see then we need to increase the border radius. So border radius is going to like 50%. Then it will become a round like structure, means it will become a rounded. And then we need to use here another property which is like width. So we need to specify the width to 30 pixel, and also the height is 30 pixel. So it looks like a perfect circle. You can see now it's looking more beautiful, I can say that. Or if I increase the font size to 16 pixel, so it will increase the font size, and also font weight, and it's going to like bold. So it's now become appearing more crisp. And the last property is actually we need to change the cursor pointer. So when we hover over it, then it will become changes the cursor to pointer. We are successfully able to fetch the list, means we are able to add the expense and render the expenses. So the last step is we need to add the code to delete the expense. So right now you can see we can add the more elements like sugar. Okay, and if I enter here and enter like $50, and if I enter, then you can see we are able to add it, but there is no way we can delete it, although we are getting this pointer style cursor. So we need to add the code inside this delete expense function. Actually, you must guys wondering why I sometimes call this function as method, because in object oriented we call the function as method, and in normal code without the object oriented we call the functions as functions. So that is why sometimes I interchangeably use these terms, but it is actually a function, yes. So let's start implementing the code inside the delete function. Now this code is little bit tricky because we have to add some more code, because we also need to attach the listener to this button and also add the code to delete this particular list from the HTML element. Okay, so to do that, this is actually a little bit tricky stuff, so don't worry, I'm going to explain the code. So the first thing is going to accept a one parameter which is of type index. We're actually going to pass an event. Okay, according to that event, it's going to delete the list from the expense. Then we need to use here a short syntaxing to actually minus. So it's actually used to minus the things. And then here we will be using the expenses array. Inside of the array, I'm going to pass the index, which is our event. Okay, whichever we want, because everything is actually stored in the form of indexing, starting from 0 or to the line, because this element is stored inside the array in a index as 0. This will be stored in 1, this will be stored in 2. So that is why we are actually passing the index here to delete the element inside the array amount. And then after that, we are calling here expenses dot splice method. So you can see you can hover over it, so removes elements from an array, and if necessary inserts a new element in their place, returning the deleted element. So splice method does what? it actually removes the element from an array. So you can hover over it to actually read the short description Visual Studio provided. So it actually removes the element from the array. Also, it's going to return the deleted element and inserts a new element in their place. So that is why. So it's whatever index we will provide it here, it's going to delete that element and also going to insert a new element. Okay, and then we need to call here a render expense function, because after deleting the element we also need to render the UI element. That is the reason. And by doing this, once I control save it, you can see the code is actually changed, because once we refresh the JavaScript code, it's actually re-render the JavaScript page, means this re-render the web page. So if I click it here and if I use here a cola, and if I click OK and enter here $60, press enter. If I click on this, then you can see nothing is working. The reason for that, because we need to add the listener to this particular button. So to do that, let's add it and wrap this lecture quickly. So I am going to add here expense list dot add event listener. So the event listener that we want to add is actually our click event. So we need to specify the click event here by adding the click event, and then we need to specify a comma, and inside of that we need to specify the function, and then we need to pass here an event. Okay, and then this is the function event we have passed, and actually add event listener. So we have actually opened the brackets in the wrong form. We need to open the brackets here. That is why it's actually giving us the error. So inside of that we need to actually check for the condition. So we are going to write here if, because adding the event listener, we need to add the listener to the button, not when we click on these items. If we click on the item, that is also going to delete the button. So that is the reason we need to add the condition here. So we are going to use here if event dot target dot class list. So we are targeting the element class list dot contains, and inside of that I will be using here in double quotes, which is our delete, which is the class name that we have specified. So I'm going to copy it, so it will be saves a little bit of our time. So this is our delete button. So I'm going to coming back bottom of the code project, and if I paste it here, so what we are actually targeting the event dot target dot class list dot contains. If class list, whatever listener we are adding, if it contains a delete expense button, okay, then we are going to open the body of the if condition, and then we'll be writing the code. We are actually using here a const variable, const index, and inside of the index we are going to use here array dot from function, and then inside of that we are going to use here a event dot target dot our parent node dot parent node. So parent node, again we are calling the parent node, and dot children, and we are using here a index of. Okay guys, so this is the code we have actually used here, and inside of this index of, I'm going to just take it to the next line, index of, and then need to specify the code inside of that by using the event dot target dot parent node. Then we need to pass this index to the our delete expense function as a parameter, whatever index node we are actually calculating. Okay, so once I do that, and if I refresh it, then if I click on the add expense button, if I enter here like food, hit OK, and I enter here like 50, then if I click on this like arrow button, then you can see the item is removed. So this particular line of code does what? It's actually creating that index we actually want to delete it. Okay, now I'm going to explain this code in a more detail, because right now this will be the most confusing thing for this entire project. I know that. So the first I'm going to start with this delete expense one. So what this particular line of code does, it's going to actually deduct the amount from the expense according to the index of the item which is deleted. And this splice wheel does, it's actually going to delete the item and also returns the new item. Means it's going to return the deleted item, and in place of the deleted item it's going to place the new item. Now these two are easiest one to understand, I think. Now the main thing is, this is where we have added the listener. The first is the if condition. If event.target.classList.contains delete expense button. So this basically used to check whether the clicked button, which is the click event function, when we click on the button, suppose if I add here a like, so suppose here if I add here a like fruit, okay, that's okay, and then enter here 50. Then if we click on this, then this is having a class called delete expense button. So this particular if condition checks for that condition. If the click item is event contains the delete expense button class, if it is a delete button expense class, which is true in case if I click on it, then it's going to remove the item. So then this code will be executed. So we need to main focus is this particular code. So first we have created an index constant, which is pretty much easy one. Then we have here used the two functions of the array, which is array.from and index of. So this particular line of code does what? It's going to return the parent node of the list element. Okay. Whenever the element is clicked, right now at this point of time, this element will be clicked. So it's going to return the parent node. And then this particular one will actually return the parent node of the class list. So it's going to determine that. Now this will have the array of the child elements. So we need to find the index of the child elements, because which is provided by this particular one, because you can see that parent node.children, so it will have the collection of the children elements, and that will be passed to the index of. So we need to calculate the index of all the child elements. So that will be calculated with the use of this index of function. And later on, once we calculate it, we are going to pass the index to this delete expense function to delete the node. So I think you get the complete idea how this code is working. If you want more in-depth explanation, you can Google it, because at this particular tutorial I can do this is the best that I can explain it. So if you want to learn more, you can just simply go and Google it, because this is a code that will actually you can actually learn by just practicing more JavaScript. So that marks the completion of the video lecture of this expense tracker application. If you like this lecture, then please leave a review, because your review definitely going to help me to improve my future courses. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next lecture. Thank you.